Today I want to talk to you about The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I have finished the first part of The Lord of the Rings, just finished it earlier today, and I thought rather than waiting until the very end of the book and talking about the whole book, I would split it into three because certainly there's a lot to talk about in each of these. This is a reread for me. I read The Lord of the Rings as individual novels when I was a teenager the very first time. And it's been such a pleasure to go back to it now because I have just a lot more experience than when I read it back then. More life experience, more experience as a reader. I've read more different fantasy worlds, and I've taken a lot more of Tolkien lore in over the years, especially thanks to the movie, some of the other stories and books that Tolkien has written that I read, beyond The Hobbit, which I actually read before this. And so I feel like I definitely absorbed a lot more, but there was just so much that I didn't, of course, appreciate as a teenager. I don't think I realized how special what I was reading was. And in some ways, I was probably a little more uncritical then. So I thought it'd be fun, not so much to review this book, but to just sort of talk about the experience of reading it a second time, so far removed from the first time I read it. So in some ways, my memory of the book was sort of obfuscated by my love of the movies and having seen them so many times, which is one of the reasons why I really love going back to the original text and just seeing how much they actually pulled from Tolkien. It was so much. There's a lot that got left behind, but really a lot of that, it has to do with the Barrow-wights and Tom Bombadil, and really just sort of the timeline. This book, much like The Hobbit, is much more lackadaisical in its timeline. Decades pass before Frodo leaves the Shire after Bilbo does, and there's other examples like that. There's a reason why this book has so much scholarship behind it. There's a reason why this book people read every year. This is a book that 100% stands up to reading decades apart. And I really have just enjoyed the experience of reading this so much, partly because of what it was doing within my own memory and within my own life and within my own reading, world, but also just because it's a really beautiful book. There are just beautiful passages within this book. There are nuggets of wisdom. There are beautiful character moments. And one of the things that I was reminded of, and this is at play in The Hobbit as well, but I think he actually even gets better here in The Lord of the Rings, is how funny J.R.R. Tolkien can be. And it's a very sort of, British sense of humor. But one of the things that had me laughing out loud that I had actually completely forgotten about were all the gifts that Bilbo left for the people in Hobbiton when he leaves. And they're basically just a lot of jokes, like sort of passive aggressive jokes. And I laughed out loud. I'm not sorry to say. And there are several things like that as well in the early parts of this book. That was one of the things that was really interesting reading it again and seeing very plainly how it feels like The Fellowship of the Ring in particular is a sort of gentle segue from The Hobbit, which was definitely meant as a children's book, to The Lord of the Rings, which deals with more complex and dark things. And The Fellowship of the Ring kind of sits in the middle there, right? I think that there is a sort of gentleness and humor that sometimes gets lost in modern fantasy. Everyone's trying to be so cool. Everyone's trying to make quips. Even as dark as it gets, I feel like the guiding hand of the author is thinking very sensitively about his reader and how he's impacting them. So there are some of my initial thoughts about The Fellowship of the Ring. Obviously, people have gone on and written entire books about this book, and I certainly could keep talking about individual aspects of it. But I think overall, those are the big takeaways that I have in this first reread. Now I'm off to read The Two Towers.